Next news is Russia says some troops pulling back from areas near Ukraine. This issue related to Russia and Ukraine. Now, for quite some time, the issue or conflict is going on between Ukraine and Russia. In this context, we will see what are the various dimensions involved, how we have to connect various issues, and how we have to think about our GS papers. Now, if we take this, here the present context or the immediate issue which we are seeing today is there are some troop movement in the borders between Ukraine and Russia. Here if we take this, here there are some troops, Russian troops entered into Belarus and into this zone. Now this is creating trouble for Ukraine. Now this issue is escalating the relations between Russia and European countries on one hand and Russia and USA on the other hand. Here today's news is only about Russian military exercises. So Russian military movements were there. Russia is saying it is part of exercise. It is doing military exercises. But this side, Europe and USA are saying they are moving the military to annex Ukraine. So now this is assuming significance. We have to see if this issue is arising. Now we have to see deeper and what kind of other dimensions are involved in it and how we have to think about our examination perspective. Here, Russian Ukraine, this issue deeply go to the times of Cold War. Here something related to NATO we will get to know, and cyber attacks, civil war in Ukraine, separatist tendencies in Ukraine, and something related to passports. So these are various issues that involved in Russia and Ukraine issue. And in the larger context, if such incidents are taking place in different parts of the country, then we have to think about other international dimensions like balance of power, arms race, international anarchy, global governance, and role of United Nations to solve such kind of conflicts. So this is how broadly, if this issue comes in a news article, then we should be able to think in multiple dimensions. Now let us start. First we will trace what is the issue, then we will develop various issues, how to think about various dimensions. Now let us start. Here the immediate news is saying there were troop movements into Belarus and to this side and to Crimean side. Now Belarus and Russia are allies. That's why Belarus is a country, independent sovereign country. Still Russia and Belarus have close relations. Now there were troop movements into Belarus also and to the other side of Ukraine to other areas as well. Now let us see. If there are troop movements surrounding a particular country, then what would be the reaction of this country? Then should it think that they are doing only military exercises, or does a country has legitimate security threat or not? So in this context, when Russia is moving its troops, Ukraine is saying that there is a threat to its national security. Now other countries should help Ukraine to contain this particular threat. Now this has become issue between Russia on one hand and European countries on the other hand and USA the other dimension. Now we should go back to the Cold War times. Why Ukraine is becoming an important pawn in the global calculations between Russia and USA? We should go back to the times of Cold War. Immediately after the conclusion of Second World War, United Nations was created to solve such kind of global catastrophic wars like World War II. But unfortunately, it resulted in a new type of war, that is Cold War. Though it was not like World War II, Cold War means the parties involved in the war do not fight directly with weapons. It is an ideological war. So it was an ideological. During that time, world was divided into two parts. One is capitalist world, another one is communist world. Capitalist countries led by USA and communist countries led by USSR. So it was like USA versus USSR. So United States of America, Union of Soviet Socialists of Republic. So now USSR, this represented communist world, USA represented capitalist world. These two blocks, it became bloc politics. Some countries aligned with the USA, some countries aligned with the communist bloc. Now you can see entire world was divided into two blocks. One is capitalist or democratic bloc, they said. Another one is capitalist. Now another one is communist. They wanted to propagate social justice, the principle of social justice throughout the world. These two blocks have created instruments to fight this bloc politics or to fight this Cold War. One such instrument was NATO. North Atlantic Treaty Alliance was created by capitalist bloc led by USA. Many European countries joined in it. Now, this was an instrument to fight against USSR. This is the result of Cold War. Now, this was created in 1949. Today, we are talking about 2022. Still, NATO is in existence. But there is no USSR today. USSR got disintegrated in 1991 and the entire communist bloc got dissolved. It got collapsed. Now only one superpower, USA, emerged. Now USSR disintegrated into many parts and some of them are like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. So these countries, Eastern European countries, Ukraine and Central Asian republics, all these were once part of USSR. Later they became independent sovereign countries. So that means here Ukraine was one of the USSR bloc and Russia was one of the USSR member countries. Now in 1991 it got disintegrated. When it got disintegrated, still NATO is continuing its power. Now USSR, the power of USSR or the legacy of USSR is taken by Russia. Now you think of this. It was USSR once, now it is Russia. It took the legacy of USSR. On the other hand, now NATO powers are here. When during Cold War time period, both Russia or USSR and USA fought ideological war and it led to arms race. Both countries built a lot of bombs. It led to nuclear race. And at one point of time in Cuban Missile Crisis, USSR and USA almost came together to clash with nuclear powers. However, it was averted. That danger was averted. So nuclear arms race. Now entire world was on the brink of another catastrophic war like World War II. But somehow it was averted and it continued till 1991 with disintegration of USSR. Now there are no bloc politics. Now Russia says when there is no bloc politics, when there is no Cold War, when there is no threat of communism, why still NATO is in existence? Why NATO was dissolved? Because Russia sees NATO is against the interests of Russia. Now Russia feels that it wants to protect national security or it wants to protect its national interests, by having influence over the erstwhile USSR countries. So these are the countries erstwhile part of USSR. So these countries, Russia sees these countries are part of one family, and moreover in these border areas, for example, if we take Ukraine, in these border areas, many people are still ethnically close to Russian. So ethnically they are close to Russian ethnicity. So that's why these countries are seen as like a family. Now if NATO involves in these countries, it becomes a security threat for Russia. Now after saying this reason, Russia is trying to influence its authority in these countries. So one such country was Ukraine. Now if we take this, in 2014, in Ukraine there are two problems. One problem came, two powers were there. One wanted to become close towards Europe. European countries formed together called European Union as a union to promote the security, strategic and economic interests of Western European countries. Ukraine, there are two interpretations or two ideologies within Ukraine politics. So one section says they should go to closer towards European Union and NATO, and they wanted to join NATO. At the moment it is not full member of NATO. Now this section wanted, so one part of ideology or some section of people wanted to get closer to European Union and NATO. There is other section of people, they want close relations with Russia. Now naturally when there are two ideologies within the country, it will create civil war if it is not addressed peacefully or properly. Now in Ukraine also this problem emerged. Now one section became pro-Russians, one section became pro-European Union. This created problem. Now in the eastern part of Ukraine, now there were separatist tendencies. Now either they want to become separate country from Ukraine or they want to join with Russia. So naturally it is said Russia is supporting the separatist forces, and it is indirectly encouraging these people to go against this particular idea. Under these circumstances, now the presently Ukraine government is closer towards European Union. Now Russia is now moving its forces to Belarus and to the border side. And in 2014, when this problem was going on, Russia annexed this part of Ukraine territory. So this is Crimea. Crimea was annexed by Russia in 2014 when internal civil war was going on in Ukraine. Still in Ukraine, these two forces are fighting against each other. Now Russia is moving its forces. Now Russia says it is only part of military exercise. When it comes to policy of NATO, Russia says Ukraine should not be part of NATO. Whereas Ukraine, some ideological or the politicians, some powers within Ukraine wants to be part of European Union. At present, government of Ukraine wants to be part of NATO, and it is requesting NATO members to speed up its membership. So that is why it is seen as against Ukraine, the present day Ukraine government. Now these movements, military movements, are seen as a threat to Ukraine. USA and other European countries are seeing at some point, at any point of time, Russia is going to annex Ukraine. Because in 2014 also, when this kind of problem arose, and it has annexed Crimea. Crimea annexation became the first such incident since World War II. That is why the issue between Russia and Ukraine is gaining global significance, because threat in anywhere in the world becomes a threat to everywhere. Now under these context, now we have to see balance of power, arms race, international anarchy, global governance, and role of United Nations. So far we have seen the issue between only Russia and Ukraine. So Russia says NATO is not relevant during 21st century. It was against USSR. Now USSR got disintegrated. Now there is no place for NATO now. Russia wants limited force of NATO in the eastern part of Europe. But NATO says it is open, it is free, any member can join it. Now if you see many eastern part of Europe, many countries of eastern part of Europe joined NATO after 1991. This is seen by Russia as a threat to its sovereignty or national security interests. Now often cyber attacks also take place. Mostly Russia cyber attacks takes place on Russian Ukraine government websites and banking system. And civil war was going on one hand, separatist movements are going on in Ukraine, and many Ukraine people are given passports by Russian government. So at any point of time, if any threat to these people arises within Ukraine, now Russia may see it as an advantage or may take it as reason to interfere in the Ukraine internal matters. So this is purely related to Ukraine and Russian issue. But now how it is going to change the balance of power? What is the term balance of power, arms race, anarchy, and global governance? Now what this issue can have implications on international relations or international peace? We have to see this now. Suppose now issue is between two countries. Now NATO is seen as a threat by Russia. Now it will change the balance of power. So what is this balance of power? Balance of power means if two powers are equal in nature, if power 1, in this case USA led NATO, here in this case Russia, if both are equally powerful, then that becomes balance of power. That means USA cannot become a threat to Russia. Russia cannot become a threat to USA. Now, when two major powers are there, but in this case, if you take Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine on one hand, Russia on other hand, Russia is more powerful, Ukraine is not powerful. That means balance of power is tilted towards Russia. Russia becomes more powerful. Now, other countries led by USA, now NATO forces, if they join Ukraine, now balance of power tilt towards Ukraine side and towards NATO side, and Russia feels threatened. Now in the first incident, Ukraine feels threatened. Now in the second incident, Russia feels threatened. So this will disrupt the balance of power. Now in order to balance this power game, now both try to increase their arms. So they will create lot of arms, nuclear arms on both sides, nuclear arms race and other biological weapons or any weapon. We do not know what kind of weapons they are going to create to neutralize that threat. So this will lead to arms race. So one is balance of power. Now when one side feels that they are threatened by the other power, now arms race will start. To balance this power, the other side also start the arms race. Now if this condition goes on, now one day at one point of time, any trigger can lead to explosive situation. Now this will have catastrophic war. That is why it will lead to international anarchy. In this situation, it will lead to international anarchy, means there is no global institution. There is no global institution which can check this arms race and which can assure the powers or smaller countries that they will not be threatened, their sovereignty will not be threatened by major powers. So global governance should be there. After Second World War, the United Nations was created, a international institution was created, but still, though in some cases it was successful, but when it comes to major powers like USA, USSR, and when it comes to the UNSC, United Nations Security Council permanent members, UN was not strong enough to control these aggressive activities. That is why UN is still weak. Now, if more powerful countries play together, now the other countries will get disadvantaged. Now, entire world politics will revolve around arms race. The other countries also will feel threatened. Now, for example, Russia increases arms race, feeling that NATO is going to attack them. And on the other hand, if Russia increases the arms, then Estonia and the neighboring countries, they also try to put more budget on their arms. So military budgets will increase. Now if military budgets increase, the amount for welfare activities goes down. So it will affect the entire economic system. So now entire economic system, entire global economy gets backseat. Now entire world go to the brink of war. So it will lead to catastrophic war. It will go against entire humanity itself. So conflict between two countries will create trouble for entire humanity itself. So if there is any such kind of war like World War II, so they will, like Albert Einstein once said, I don't know what World War III, what kind of weapons countries will use in World War III, but after that people will use only stones to fight against each other. That means after World War, if there is any World War III, that means the entire humanity is going to be collapsed and the entire human race goes back to Stone Ages. So this is the kind of impact that is going to have if any World War III happens. So these incidents like this, it should be handled peacefully. This is why, what is the concern for countries like India? What is the role of India and how India view this kind of global politics? India is always pro international governance. Our global institutions like United Nations should be strong enough so that whenever such legitimate concerns are there between countries, they should be solved peacefully through dialogue. So always institutional mechanism should be there. Dialogue is the only resolution mechanism, not the armed conflict. So countries like India always propagate or always aim to follow the peaceful resolution mechanism. So this is how we have to see Russian military exercise. So in present day context, it is only like military movement. On one hand, it is saying, Russia says it is only part of military exercise. The other side viewing it as a threat to their sovereignty. But now, as a UPSC aspirant, and how we have to see this particular issue, how it can evolve into many dimensions. So we have to see balance of power, arms race, global governance, and role of United Nations. These are the various issues. Thank you.